So, connections. Connections aren't just the people we meet and the relationships we form with them. Connections are pieces of information. And the more connections we start having, the more likely it is that some of that information will be incorrect. Sometimes this is done intentionally for propaganda, but most of the time it's unintentional. Sometimes the accuracy of the information has just been taken for granted. Now, the internet has become this wide open channel of communication and information, which is wonderful in so many respects, but it's also become something that people use as a vehicle for their own opinions, beliefs, and agendas, all of which are byproducts of subjective thought and catalysts for bias. Now, bias in and of itself isn't always a bad thing. It's quite natural, but the trouble starts when a piece of information tainted by bias is spread through social media and other online means, and that's when the line between propaganda and fact starts to blur. One of the most important things I learned when I studied to become a journalist is that you have to tell a story with honesty. But actually, even more important than that is that you need to look at a story with skepticism. And skepticism is often seen as something quite negative. It's equated with pessimism or belligerence. But actually, it's becoming an increasingly useful tool that just lets us crack through that first layer of a story, a layer which is often filled with misinformation. Now, it may sound tedious to do this with everything you come across, but it's actually quite easy. You just need to let your skeptical instinct come through. So let's take a look at a few examples and see how we can do that. So this is something that was shared quite a lot over the summer at the height of the refugee crisis. The caption reads, "These aren't Syrians, they're Europeans trying to get to North Africa during the World War. So next time you think of closing the borders, you might want to check with your grandparents." Now, essentially, the message is a positive one. It's one of acceptance. So I personally agreed with it. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't be skeptical about it. And to be honest, my instinct with this one immediately kicked in. Because the first thing I thought was, well, you know what? I really don't remember that chapter in the history books about the great exodus of Europeans to North Africa during the Second World War. And I was good at history. The second thing, which maybe should have been the first, is that the photographs are in color. Now, color photography had been experimented with since the late 1800s, and then it was sort of properly developed in the 30s by Kodak. But it didn't actually become commercially viable until the 60s or 70s. So even though it's not impossible that these photos were taken in the 1940s, it's highly unlikely. So at this point, I've been able to say what these photos do not depict. But ideally, you want to be able to say exactly what they do actually represent. Now, the easiest way to do that is to find something distinctive about them. It can be landscape or monuments. Ideally, you want sort of some kind of textual evidence. And I was quite lucky in this case, since the ship's name is quite clearly visible, the Vlora. Extremely quick Google revealed that the Vlora was actually a ship that brought thousands of Albanian refugees to Italy in 1991. So even if you agree with the message that some information is trying to convey, it doesn't mean that you can just sit back and relax. Now this one was quite fun. This was shared by a friend of a friend on Facebook. And it was accompanied by a slightly hyperbolic message about wealth and poverty. Well, I mean, I was a bit struck by this one. I thought it was initially shocking and a bit funny. But I immediately thought, you know what, I don't think even Paris Hilton would wear something that says "Stop being poor." Well, you know, that's not good enough. That's just a feeling. I was bit luckier in this situation, because having worked with Photoshop for nearly 20 years, I could just see that there was something not quite right about the word poor. It just doesn't have the same distortion that the other words have, the distortion you'd expect from the fabric. And the perspective isn't quite right either. It's close, but no. I pointed this out to the original poster, but they didn't believe me, which I suppose is fair enough. So I set about trying to find a bit more evidence. So I just simply Googled Paris Hilton stop being. No word at the end. I wanted to keep the results open-ended. Sure enough, she never wore a t-shirt that says stop being poor. She wore one that says stop being desperate, whatever that means. Nevertheless, I posted this in the conversation thread, and I was like, look, it's fake. Anyway, the original poster still didn't believe me. So I was given another clue, which was the watermark, which was different with the original photo I found. So I went onto the photo library and trawled through thousands of photos of Paris Hilton. She has been to a lot of events. But eventually I got to this event and saw the whole collection of photos from that night, and she did wear a t-shirt that just said stop being desperate. I posted the link in the conversation thread, but the original poster still didn't believe me. So at this point, I chose to cut my losses. I made the decision to enjoy the rest of my day and just disengaged. Now, this example is important because it shows that sometimes you can't move people away from their convictions. They don't want to see the facts, and that's okay. I suppose that's passion. But it reinforces the importance of stopping misinformation at the source. Now, this next example sort of goes into the category of statistics, which I know nothing about. But when I came across this, I was intrigued. I suppose I was trying to figure out what it was trying to say. Initially, I thought, okay, so this is saying that sort of drinking milk doesn't prevent osteoporosis the way that we kind of assume it does. Maybe our overconsumption is leading to overproduction, which is leading to a reduction in quality, etc. And fascinating topic. But then I realized what this actually wanted to say, which is that milk causes osteoporosis, which is an altogether different message. It's a fear-mongering message, and for a cheese eater like myself, I had to take this seriously. So I set about looking for the statistics to either prove or disprove this. Googling for milk consumption was relatively easy. Eventually, I landed on a government website, I think of Canada, with some stats that I was quite happy were verified. They're from 2013, but I don't think our milk consumption has probably changed that much in the last year or so. So these are the actual figures. But I mean, they got Finland, so, good for them. Now, the osteoporosis rates proved to be a little bit more difficult. After doing a lot of research, it turns out that all countries diagnose osteoporosis differently. Sometimes countries don't have the medical devices to diagnose it in the first place. So the stats will be all over the place and just not reliable. So I was a little bit disappointed that I couldn't, fully disprove this or debunk this. But then actually I was okay with it because I realized that even if I had the figures for osteoporosis, I realized that this comparison is actually a massive fallacy and completely irresponsible. Because if you think about consumers of milk, they are between the age of 3 months and 100 years. Sufferers of osteoporosis tend to be above the age of 55. So even if I had the numbers, it wouldn't be something that you can actually compare. The main lesson to take from this is get your health information from other means, not social media. So just head to the World Health Organization, the NHS, or equivalent. So now, just when you thought that maybe it's just social media that is a minefield of misinformation, you would unfortunately be wrong, because even some of those sources that we trust and that we expect will give us correct information, well, sometimes they let us down. Apologies, there we go. So, this was a story that was broken by the Huffington Post in August of this year, again at the height of the refugee crisis. It was a story of a man Instagramming his way from Senegal to Europe. The reaction obviously was of amazement, and I was amazed myself, but I was extremely skeptical about it. Because I thought, you know what, if you're taking this journey, this extremely dangerous journey, is the priority going to be to Instagram your way there? You're probably going to have to run away from authority once or twice. So are you going to get your phone out and take a picture? Probably not. And then you're going to land in sort of remote coastal areas which might not have coverage. Unlikely, but all right, let's say that you can do all those things, fine. Would you still have the time to include 25 hashtags with each photo? Probably not. Anyway, within about 2 days, the Huffington Post had to publish an update stating that this was actually a marketing ploy by a Spanish agency to promote a photographic exhibition. And to be fair, this was hidden in plain sight, considering that the name of the exhibition is one of the hashtags. So, despite sort of how questionable this marketing tactic is, considering what was happening at the time, that's sort of irrelevant, because the fault here lies clearly with the Huffington Post that didn't do its job. It simply published without verifying. And that's just the problem nowadays. We have access to so much information comes across us, that we just don't have time to look at everything. And what we do look at, we look at it very quickly. We sort of gloss over it. And then when the information is visual with photographs or diagrams or graphs, the impact is immediate, but it's an emotional impact. And then again, we move on. And we never really let our rational thinking take over and just really evaluate what it is we're looking at. So with an increase of connections, it's important that we maintain these connections and that they stay sort of healthy and useful to us. And we can all play a part in ensuring that that happens. I mean, it's very simply, it's just a matter of taking the time to really look at something and sort of question it a little bit. Read something once and twice and even 3 times. And if something doesn't really feel right, then look a bit more into it. But more importantly, what we need to do is sort of go out there and quite simply just be the best skeptics that you can be. Thank you very much.